Danny Way pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor of Starlight Station, his shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. The third shift suited him perfectly. No crowds, no rushed diplomats shoving past him, no one staring at his hearing aids or speaking too fast for him to read their lips. Just him, his cart, and miles of halls that needed cleaning. He had worked on the station for 6 years now, ever since Earth joined the Galactic Council. Most people barely noticed custodians. They looked right through him, which Danny preferred most days. He could do his job, watch the stars through the observation windows, and go home to his small quarters without dealing with the chaos of diplomatic life. Tonight felt different, though. The station buzzed with unusual energy even at this late hour. Danny had learned to read vibrations through the floor, the way people moved, the lights that flickered with increased power usage. Something important was happening. He turned the corner into the main observation deck and immediately understood why. Dragons filled the space. Real dragons, not the creatures from old Earth stories, but close enough. The Draconids had arrived. Danny had seen pictures, but nothing prepared him for the reality. They stood twice as tall as humans, their scales shimmering in shades of deep crimson and gold. Wings folded against their backs. Claws that could tear through steel rested carefully on the furniture designed to hold their weight. They moved with deadly grace, every gesture controlled and purposeful. To the center of the group stood one dragon who looked younger than the others. His scales were darker, almost black with hints of deep blue. He wore robes marked with symbols Danny recognized as royal insignia. This had to be the prince everyone whispered about, Prince Asherin, the Broken Prince, the one who never spoke. Danny kept his head down and began cleaning the far end of the observation deck. He had learned long ago that if he moved quietly and stayed out of the way, people forgot he existed. He could observe without being observed. The Draconid delegation spread across the deck, speaking in their rumbling language that Danny felt more than heard. One dragon in particular, wearing the robes of a high counselor, seemed to speak for everyone. He gestured dramatically while the others listened. But the prince remained perfectly still. A group of delegates from another species entered the deck. Danny recognized them as Taurans, based on their blue skin and ridge-covered heads. Their leader looked directly at Prince Asherin and spoke in the common galactic language. "So this is the Emperor's youngest son. I had heard the rumors, but I assumed they were exaggerated." The Tauran's voice dripped with contempt that Danny caught even without hearing every word. "A prince who cannot speak. How unfortunate for your people." The Counselor Dragon stepped forward quickly. "Prince Asherin hears and understands all that is said. I serve as his voice in these matters." "Yes, how convenient," another Tauran said, barely hiding a smirk. "We are to negotiate a border dispute with a prince who must have his words spoken by another. Tell me, Counselor, are these truly his words, or simply what you wish him to say?" The counselor's scales rippled with anger, but before he could respond, the Tauran delegation turned and left. Their laughter echoed down the hallway. Danny glanced at Prince Asherin. The dragon had not moved during the entire exchange. His face remained a perfect mask, revealing nothing. But his eyes followed the Taurans until they disappeared from view. Those eyes held intelligence and awareness that nobody else seemed to notice. The Draconid delegation began speaking among themselves in low voices. Danny caught fragments of frustration and concern. The counselor looked exhausted. Other dragons kept glancing at their prince with expressions that Danny recognized. He had seen those same looks directed at himself his entire life. Pity mixed with discomfort. One by one, the delegation filed out of the observation deck, leaving the prince alone. Still, Asherin did not move. He stood facing the large window that showed the planet below and the stars beyond. Danny continued cleaning, working his way closer to where the prince stood. He should probably leave and give the prince privacy, but something made him stay. Maybe it was the loneliness he recognized in that perfect stillness. Maybe it was curiosity that Danny bent to pick up some scattered data tablets the delegates had left behind. He saw something that made him pause. The prince's claws were moving. Not large movements, but small, deliberate gestures. His talons curled and uncurled in specific patterns. Danny froze. He knew what that looked like. He had done the same thing himself countless times when he was younger, before he learned proper sign language. When you had thoughts but no one to share them with, your hands still tried to speak. The prince was signing. Not in any language Danny recognized. Not ASL or any Earth Sign language. But it was signing nonetheless. Purposeful. Meaningful. A language the prince had created for himself because no one else would listen. Danny watched for several more minutes until the prince finally left the observation deck. Those clawed hands never stopped moving, never stopped trying to communicate with an empty room. Danny finished his cleaning in thoughtful silence. When his shift ended and he returned to his quarters, he could not stop thinking about what he had seen. The galaxy called the prince broken, unable to speak, defective. But Danny knew the truth now. Prince Asherin was not silent. Everyone else was simply refusing to hear him. Danny lay in bed as artificial morning light began to fill his window. He made a decision. He did not know if it would work. He did not know if the prince would even want his help. But Danny had spent his entire life being dismissed as less than because he communicated differently. He would not watch someone else suffer the same fate. Tomorrow night, he would try to speak with the Dragon Prince. Not with words, but with hands. The language everyone overlooked. The language that might just change everything. Danny spent his entire day off researching everything he could find about the Draconids. The station's database contained volumes of information about their culture, their military might, their complex honor codes. Their language fascinated him most. Draconid speech required not just vocal cords, but specialized organs that produced controlled bursts of flame. The flame shaped the sound, creating their language. Without the ability to produce fire, speaking was impossible. He found medical journals discussing rare cases of draconids born without functioning flame sacs. The articles described such individuals as tragically disabled, unable to participate fully in their society. One paper mentioned that such draconids were often kept hidden from public view, but nowhere did Danny find any mention of sign language in draconid culture. No alternative methods of communication. Nothing. His research was interrupted by a message from his supervisor reminding him that shift started in 2 hours. Danny prepared his cleaning supplies with unusual nervousness. He had a plan, or at least the beginning of one, that the botanical garden occupied an entire section of the station. Earth plants mixed with vegetation from dozens of worlds, creating an explosion of colors and shapes that seemed impossible. The garden stayed open all hours because many species found the greenery calming. At 3 in the morning, Danny knew it would be nearly empty. He pushed his cart through the entrance and began his usual routine. The air here always felt different, humid and rich with the scent of growing things. He cleaned the pathways and wiped down the benches while his mind raced through what he might say if the prince appeared 40 minutes into his shift. He heard the soft sound of claws on stone. Danny looked up and felt his heart jump. Prince Asherin walked slowly down one of the garden paths, his dark scales almost invisible in the dim lighting. The dragon moved between the flowers with surprising gentleness, occasionally reaching out to touch a petal with one careful talon. Danny took a deep breath and stepped into the prince's path. Asherin stopped immediately, his crystalline eyes focusing on the small human before him. For a long moment, neither moved. Danny wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The prince could crush him without effort. Then Danny raised his hands and signed a simple greeting in ASL. Hello. The prince's eyes widened. His whole body went rigid with attention. Those intelligent eyes locked onto Danny's hands with an intensity that was almost frightening. Danny pointed to himself and slowly fingerspelled his name. D-I-N-N-Y. Then he waited. Asherin stared at Danny's hands for several heartbeats. Then, slowly, the prince raised his own clawed hand. He made a gesture, bringing his talons to his chest and then extending them toward Danny. The movement looked formal, important. Danny copied the gesture as best he could with his human hands. The prince's eyes brightened. For the next 20 minutes, they exchanged signs. Danny pointed to a flower and signed the word. Asherin watched carefully, then made his own sign for the same flower. Different from ASL, but clearly intentional. They moved through the garden this way, building a tiny shared vocabulary of objects and simple concepts. Danny discovered that Asheron's signing was elegant despite his claws. The dragon had adapted his gestures to work with his anatomy. Some signs used his wings in subtle ways. Others incorporated small movements of his tail. This was not random movement. This was a complete language the prince had developed alone. "Your Highness, it is time to return." The voice came from the garden entrance. Counselor Rex stood there, his expression dark with disapproval. He looked at Danny as if the human were something unpleasant stuck to his foot that Asheron's hand stilled immediately. The openness in his expression closed off, replaced by the blank mask Danny had seen in the observation deck. "You," Rex said, pointing at Danny. "Custodian. The prince has important matters to attend to. Leave him alone." Danny nodded and stepped back, keeping his eyes down respectfully. But as he moved away, he felt the prince's gaze following him. When Danny glanced back, Asheron signed something. The gesture was quick, hidden from Rex's view. Danny did not know what it meant, but he understood the emotion behind it. "Thank you." The next day, Danny could not focus on anything but that meeting. He told himself he should probably forget the whole thing. He was just a custodian. The prince had counselors and advisors. What could Danny possibly offer? But he remembered those signs, that complete language Asheron had created in isolation. Someone that intelligent, that creative, should not be dismissed as broken. During his shift, Danny made a decision that could get him fired. He took a spare data tablet from the lost and found, loaded it with videos teaching basic ASL, and left it on the bench where he had first met the prince. He placed a small note with it that simply said, "For learning," with an arrow pointing to the garden's east corner where fewer security cameras could see. The next night, Danny returned to the garden at the same time. He tried to look busy cleaning while his stomach twisted with anxiety. What if Asheron had not found the tablet? What if Rex had discovered it first? What if the prince did not want this kind of help? Then he heard those careful claws on stone again. Asheron appeared from between two large ferns, and he was holding the tablet. The dragon's eyes found Danny. Immediately, Asheron set the tablet down carefully and began to sign. The movements were still clumsy, mixing ASL with his own language, but Danny understood. "Thank you, friend." "Learn." Danny felt something warm expand in his chest. He signed back, keeping the gestures simple and clear. "You're welcome. We learned together." They spent 2 hours that night teaching each other. Asheron proved to be an incredibly fast learner. He absorbed new signs after seeing them only once or twice. More importantly, he began teaching Danny his own sign language. The dragon showed Danny the signs for honor, sky, home, pain, hope. Each gesture carried weight and meaning that went beyond simple translation. As they practiced, Danny noticed Asheron's whole demeanor had changed. The dragon no longer held himself with that rigid stillness. He moved more freely, his signs becoming more animated as excitement replaced caution. This was what Asheron looked like when he could truly communicate. Finally, Danny signed a question. "What do you want?" Asheron paused. His claws moved slowly, carefully forming words in their shared pigeon language. "I want to speak. I want them to hear me." Danny signed back immediately. "Then I'll teach them to listen." The human ambassador looked exhausted. Rebecca Ford had served on Starlight Station for 15 years, navigating countless diplomatic crises. Right now, she stared at Danny across her desk with an expression caught between interest and disbelief. "Let me make sure I understand," Ford said slowly. "You, a third-shift custodian, have been secretly meeting with Prince Asheron of the Draconid Empire and teaching him sign language." "Not exactly teaching," Danny signed, then remembered to speak out loud. "We're teaching each other. He already has his own sign language. We're just creating a bridge. And you think this will help with the border negotiations? I think it will let him speak for himself instead of through Counselor Rex." Ford leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "Danny, do you understand the situation we're in? The Torrens have given us 2 days to accept their terms, or they're pulling out of negotiations. If that happens, both sides will likely mobilize military forces. This dispute could turn into a war. All the more reason to let the prince actually communicate, Danny said. Maybe he has solutions nobody's heard because nobody's listening. Ford studied him for a long moment. You realize if this goes wrong, if we offend the Draconid delegation, the consequences could be catastrophic. With respect, Ambassador, they're already being offended. Every species on this station treats Prince Asherin like he's stupid or broken. But he's neither. He's brilliant. He just needs someone to understand his language. Something shifted in Ford's expression. She had built her career on reading people and situations. You really believe in this? I know what it's like to be dismissed because you communicate differently. Danny signed and spoke simultaneously. I won't watch it happen to someone else when I can help. Ford was quiet for several seconds. Then she nodded. All right, I can't officially support this, but I can buy you time. The council has one open speaking slot tomorrow before the final vote. If you can convince the Draconid delegation to let their prince use it, I'll make sure he gets the chance. Danny left the ambassador's office with hope and terror competing in his chest. They had one day to prepare. That night, in the botanical garden, Danny explained the situation to Asherin. The prince's reaction was immediate and visceral. He signed fear, impossible, shame. His whole body trembled slightly. Danny reached out slowly, giving Asherin time to pull away. When the prince did not move, Danny gently touched the dragon's scaled forearm. You can do this. I know you can. Asherin signed back, his movements sharp with distress. They think I am broken. My own people think this. Then show them the truth, Danny signed. Show everyone that being unable to speak with fire doesn't mean being unable to speak at all. They practiced through the night. Asherin had been studying the border dispute for months. He knew every treaty, every contested star system, every economic report. The problem had never been his intelligence or preparation. The problem was that nobody would take him seriously. Danny helped him structure a speech that would work through signing. They practiced the timing, making sure Danny could translate clearly. More importantly, they practiced what Asherin wanted to say about communication itself, about being judged without being understood. As artificial dawn approached, Danny signed one more question. Are you ready for what happens when your delegation finds out? Asherin's response was firm. I am ready to be heard. The explosion came faster than Danny expected. By midday, Counselor Rex had discovered their plan. He appeared in the botanical garden where Danny was supposed to be sleeping, but was instead reviewing notes with Asherin. This is outrageous, Rex's voice boomed through the garden. Your Highness, you cannot seriously be considering this. Performing manual gestures like some common laborer. It is beneath your station. It is beneath our entire species. Asherin stood slowly, drawing himself to his full height. For the first time since arriving at the station, Danny saw the dragon look truly princely. Asherin's claws moved in sharp, deliberate signs. Danny translated without being asked. I am not performing anything. I am speaking. I have always been speaking. You chose not to understand. Rex looked like he had been struck. I have served your family for 40 years. I have been your voice. You have been your voice, Danny translated as Asherin signed. You have spoken your words, your thoughts, your solutions. Never mind. This human has poisoned your mind, Rex said, gesturing at Danny. He is using you for some political game. Danny sees me. The signs were gentle now, sad. He sees me as I am, not as a failure, not as something to hide. He sees a person who has something to say. Rex left, but Danny knew this was not over. Within hours, a formal meeting was called. The entire Draconid delegation gathered in their diplomatic quarters. Danny was summoned to attend, standing before dragons who looked at him with expressions ranging from anger to confusion. General Shun, the military commander, spoke first. This human suggests our prince should address the council using hand gestures. This is an insult to our traditions. With respect, Danny said carefully, I suggest that Prince Asherin should address the council using his language. The fact that his language uses hands instead of flame does not make it less valid. He cannot produce flame speech, another dragon said. Therefore, he cannot truly speak. This is our way. This has always been our way. Then maybe your way needs to change, Danny said, then immediately regretted his bluntness. The room erupted in angry rumbling. Ambassador Ford, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. The prince has been granted a speaking slot before tomorrow's vote. That is his right as a delegate to this station. How he chooses to communicate during that time is his decision, not ours. She looked at the dragons calmly. You can support him or not, but you cannot stop him. General Shun looked at Asherin. Your Highness, if you do this and fail, the embarrassment will be felt across the entire empire. Your father sent you here to prove yourself. This is not what he meant. Asherin signed, and this time Counselor Rex translated, his voice hollow. My father sent me here expecting me to fail. He sent his broken son to negotiate because he thought it did not matter. But it does matter. These borders matter. These lives matter. I matter. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, General Shin nodded slowly. Then speak, young prince. Show us what you have to say. The council chamber held representatives from nearly 200 species. Danny had cleaned this room hundreds of times, but had never seen it like this, packed with bodies and thrumming with anticipation. Word had spread that something unprecedented was about to happen. The silent prince would finally speak. Danny stood beside the raised platform where Asherin waited. His hands felt clammy. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was so much bigger than anything he had ever done. One mistake in translation could ruin everything. Asherin stood perfectly still, but Danny had learned to read the small signs. The slight tension in the dragon's wings. The way his tail curved just slightly. The prince was terrified but determined. The Tauren delegation sat in the front section, their expressions smug. They clearly expected this to be entertainment, watching the broken prince humiliate himself. Several other delegations whispered among themselves, some curious, many skeptical. Ambassador Ford stepped to the center platform. The council recognizes Prince Asherin of the Draconid Empire. The chamber fell silent as Asherin moved forward. He did not attempt to speak with fire or with voice. Instead, he raised his clawed hands and began to sign. Danny's voice filled the chamber, clear and steady, translating each gesture. I have been silent. You have been deaf. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Some delegates leaned forward with interest. Others looked insulted that Asherin's claws moved with practiced precision. Danny had never seen him sign with such confidence, such authority. You debate borders while assuming I have nothing to contribute. You negotiate trade routes while deciding I am too broken to understand complex matters. You determine the futures of billions while dismissing me because I cannot produce flame speech. The Tauren leader started to rise, but Ambassador Ford gestured for him to remain seated. The chamber rules were clear. The speaker could not be interrupted. I have studied every treaty regarding the disputed systems. I have analyzed mineral surveys, trade projections, and population growth patterns. I have reviewed 30 years of diplomatic history between our peoples. Asherin's signs became more passionate, larger. I have done this work not through flame or voice, but through thought, through reading, through understanding. My mind is not broken, only your willingness to listen. Danny watched the delegates' faces changing. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed thoughtful. A few species that communicated non-verbally began showing signs of approval. The border dispute can be resolved, Asherin continued, but not through demands or threats. Not through assuming one side must dominate the other. His claws painted pictures in the air. The three contested systems have value to both our peoples. The Taurens need the agricultural capacity. The Draconids need the strategic positioning. Neither need can be dismissed. The signs flowed faster now, and Danny kept pace, his voice becoming an extension of Asherin's hands. I propose shared governance. Each system maintains independence, but grants both peoples equal access. Trade agreements protect Tauren agricultural interests. Defense pacts protect Draconid security concerns. Both sides gain what they truly need rather than fighting over complete control of what neither can fully use alone. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Tauren delegation looked less certain now, leaning together in urgent discussion. But Asherin was not finished. His next signs came slower, weighted with emotion. I was injured when I was young. An assassination attempt meant for my father. The attackers destroyed my flame sacs and damaged my vocal cords. In one moment, I lost the ability to speak as my people speak. Danny saw several delegates react with surprise. This information had not been public. My people see flame speech as the only true communication. Without it, I became invisible. A prince in name, but powerless in reality. I was sent here not because anyone believed I could succeed, but because my failure would not matter. The Draconid delegation shifted uncomfortably. General Shun stared at the floor. But I refused to be invisible any longer. Asherin's signs grew fierce, defiant. I have spent years developing my own language. Years trying to be understood. Years watching others speak for me, over me, instead of me. His claws moved through a series of signs that looked almost like dance, beautiful and deliberate. Communication is not just sound. It is not just flame. The Silicate Federation speaks through light pulses. The Delphines use sonar and gesture. The Kelvin hierarchy communicates through color patterns. Are they all broken because they do not speak as others speak? A silicate delegate began pulsing light in patterns that Danny recognized as their version of applause. Several Delphines created rippling gestures of agreement. Strength is not in forcing everyone to communicate the same way. Asherin signed. Strength is an understanding that there are countless ways to share thoughts, to express ideas, to connect across differences. The chamber was completely silent now, except for Danny's voice translating those powerful signs. I ask you to accept my proposal for the border dispute. But more than that, I ask you to question what other voices you're not hearing. How many brilliant minds do we dismiss because they think differently, communicate differently, exist differently than we expect? Asherin lowered his hand slowly, then made one final sign that Danny translated with emotion thick in his throat. I'm not broken. I'm different. And different does not mean less. For 3 heartbeats, the chamber remained absolutely still. Then a silicate delegate stood, light pulsing in approval. A Delphine representative rose next, gesturing support. One by one, delegates from dozens of species stood. The Tauran leader stood slowly, his expression complex. Prince Asherin, I admit I came here prepared to dismiss you. Your proposal has merit. Your words, regardless of how they are spoken, deserve consideration. He looked around the chamber. The Tauran Collective requests a recess to discuss this proposal in detail. Ambassador Ford nodded. The council will reconvene in 2 hours for discussion and voting. As the chamber emptied, Councillor Rex approached Asherin. The old dragon looked like he had aged years and minutes. He made a gesture that Danny recognized from his research, a sign of deep respect and apology in Draconid culture. I have been your counselor for 16 years, Rex said quietly. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was protecting you. But I was silencing you. He paused. Forgive me, my prince. Teach me. Teach all of us to hear. Asherin reached out and gently touched Rex's shoulder, signing with his other hand. Help me teach our people. Help them understand. 2 hours later, the vote passed. Shared governance of the disputed systems, with protections and agreements exactly as Asherin had outlined. But the council passed something else too. A resolution to develop translation systems for all forms of communication. Resources for species that used nonverbal languages. Accommodations across all council facilities. Ambassador Ford found Danny as the chamber finally emptied. You did something remarkable today. Asherin did it, Danny signed. I just translated. No, Ford said. You saw someone everyone else overlooked. You recognized that silence and voicelessness are not the same thing. She handed him a data pad. The council wants to create a new position. Director of Inclusive Communications. Someone to help implement these changes, to make sure all voices can be heard. Danny stared at the pad, then at Asherin, who was surrounded by his delegation, but watching Danny with those bright, intelligent eyes, the prince signed across the distance. Thank you, friend, Danny signed back. We are just beginning. 3 weeks passed like a dream. Danny, kept expecting to wake from. He accepted the position as Director of Inclusive Communications, moved into a real office instead of a cleaning closet, and started the overwhelming work of implementing change across an entire galactic station. But his thoughts kept drifting to Asherin, who had returned to the Draconid homeworld immediately after the vote. They had said goodbye in the botanical garden. Asherin had signed that he would return soon, but Danny knew how galactic politics worked. Soon could mean months or years. The prince had obligations, a whole empire to navigate. Their friendship, as meaningful as it felt, might just be a brief moment in both their lives. Then a Draconid military cruiser arrived at the station. Danny watched from the docking bay observation window as the massive ship connected to the station. His stomach twisted with worry. Military vessels usually meant problems. General Shun emerged first, his scales gleaming under the station lights. He spotted Danny immediately and walked over with purpose. "Danny Wei," Shun said formally. "The Emperor requests your presence on Dracus Prime." Danny's hands moved through signs before he could stop them. "Why? What happened? Is Asherin okay?" Shun's expression remained unreadable. "The prince is well, but your presence is required. That is all I am permitted to say." The 4-day journey to the Draconid homeworld gave Danny too much time to worry. The military crew treated him with polite distance. Nobody would answer his questions. He spent hours staring out the viewport at the stars, wondering what kind of situation he was flying toward. When Dracus Prime finally appeared on the view screen, Danny forgot his anxiety for a moment. The planet was stunning. Volcanic mountain ranges pierced through cloud layers. Crystal formations jutted from cliff sides, catching the light of 3 moons. Cities carved directly into mountains glowed with internal fire. Dragons filled the skies in numbers that seemed impossible, their wings catching thermal currents. The ship landed at the Imperial Palace, a structure that looked grown rather than built, rising from a volcanic peak like a natural formation. Everything was huge, built for beings twice Danny's size. Guards escorted him through hallways where every surface seemed to shimmer with heat. The throne room made Danny feel like an insect. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above. Hundreds of Draconids filled the space, all wearing formal robes marked with various ranks and houses. At the far end, on a throne made from a single piece of black volcanic glass, sat Emperor Korash. The emperor was ancient, his scales marked with countless scars from centuries of battles and leadership. His eyes held a weight that made Danny want to look away. Beside the throne stood Asherin, wearing robes more elaborate than Danny had ever seen him in. The prince's expression revealed nothing. Danny walked forward, very aware of how small and fragile he was in this room. He stopped at the appropriate distance and bowed, as Ambassador Ford had hastily instructed him before he left. Emperor Korash studied Danny for a long moment. When he spoke, Counselor Rex translated from Draconid. "You are the human who taught my son to speak with his hands." "With respect, Your Majesty," Danny said carefully, "I did not teach him to speak. He already knew how. I just learned to listen." A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled Draconids. The Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Many in my court believe you have corrupted the prince, that you have encouraged him to embrace weakness rather than overcome it." Danny's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "May I ask, Your Majesty, did you watch his address to the council? We have seen the recordings. Then you saw that Prince Asherin spoke with more power and clarity than most people achieve with voices. His words prevented a war. His intelligence and preparation impressed delegates from 200 species. That is not weakness." The Emperor leaned forward slightly. "You are bold for someone so small. I am honest for someone who knows what it means to be judged unfairly." Another ripple through the crowd. Asherin's eyes met Danny's, and Danny saw something like hope there. "Very well," the Emperor said. "You will teach me this hand language. I wish to understand what my son has learned." The court erupted. Dragons rumbled and roared in protest. Several courtiers looked scandalized, but the Emperor raised one claw and the room fell silent. For the next hour, Danny taught the Emperor of the Draconid Empire basic signs. Korash's claws were thick and scarred, stiff from age and countless battles. But he followed each instruction carefully, precisely. The entire court watched in absolute silence as their emperor learned to communicate in a way their culture had deemed beneath them. That Asherin stood perfectly still, but Danny saw the shine in the prince's eyes. Finally, the emperor made a sign, slow and careful but correct. Rex translated what he had signed. "I see you, my son." Asherin signed back, his claws trembling slightly. "I'm here, father. I've always been here." The emperor rose from his throne. For a moment, Danny thought he had made a terrible mistake, that his boldness had finally crossed a line. But then Korash approached his son and placed his forehead against Asherin's, a gesture of deep affection in Draconid culture. When the emperor turned back to face the court, his voice carried weight that needed no translation. "My sister died when I was young. She was born without the ability to produce flame speech. Our culture called her broken, defective. She was hidden away, considered shameful. I did not protect her. I let her die alone and unheard because I believed what our society taught me." The emperor's next words came slowly, heavily. "When my youngest son was injured and lost his voice, I was terrified of repeating history. I sent him away, hoping distance would protect him where my courage had failed. But I was wrong. I sent him to prove himself to others when I should have been the first to understand him." Korash made the sign Danny had taught him, the one meaning respect and recognition. No more. Sign language is now recognized as official communication throughout the Draconid Empire. Schools will teach it. Those who cannot speak with flame will no longer be hidden or shamed. My son will remain a prince with full honors and full voice. The court remained silent, stunned. Then slowly, General Shun stepped forward and made the same sign of respect. One by one, other dragons followed. That evening, Danny and Asherin walked through the palace gardens alone. The prince showed Danny the volcanic formations he had loved as a child, the crystal caves where he had hidden to practice his signs in secret. "You changed everything," Danny signed. "We changed everything," Asherin corrected. "But I must stay here now. My people need to see that this change is real. I need to lead it." Danny had known this was coming, but it still hurt. "I have to go back to the station. There is so much work to do there." "I know," Asherin signed. He reached into his robes and pulled out a crystal pendant on a chain. The stone glowed with internal fire. "This is a clan marker. It means you are family. You will always have a home here." Danny took the pendant with trembling hands. "Thank you." They stood together as 3 moons rose over the volcanic peaks, 2 friends who had changed a galaxy, now facing separate paths forward. Danny returned to Starlight Station, expecting to ease back into his new role gradually. Instead, chaos greeted him at the docking bay. Ambassador Ford rushed to meet him before he even cleared customs. "Thank every star you are back," she said, practically dragging him toward the administrative section. "We have a situation that is spiraling out of control," she explained as they walked. The communication initiative had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Dozens of species had come forward revealing they had members who communicated non-verbally. Requests flooded in for accommodations, for translation services, for educational resources. But the real crisis involved the Kelvin hierarchy. The Kelvins communicated primarily through color patterns displayed on their skin. During trade negotiations while Danny was gone, a critical misunderstanding had occurred. What the Kelvins displayed as concern about environmental protections had been interpreted as rejection of the entire trade agreement. Offended and frustrated, the Kelvins had announced they were leaving the council. 5 allied species threatened to leave with them. "Nobody on station fully understands their color language," Ford said as they entered Danny's office. "We tried using the basic translation guides, but there is nuance we are missing. The Kelvins feel insulted that we do not take their communication seriously." Danny sat heavily in his chair, feeling overwhelmed. This was so much bigger than anything he had training for. He was a custodian who had learned some sign language, not a miracle worker. His computer pinged with an incoming transmission. The center ID made his heart jump. "Asherin." The prince's face filled the screen, signing urgently. "I heard about the Kelvin situation. I am coming to help. You do not have to do that, Danny signed back. You have responsibilities there. This is my responsibility too, Ashrin responded. We started this together. I will not let it fail. 12 hours later, a Draconid ship docked with a delegation that surprised everyone. Ashrin arrived with 6 young Draconids, all carrying tablets and recording equipment. The prince explained through signs that these dragons had been studying various forms of nonverbal communication. They represented the first class of what would become the Draconid Empire's new communication corps. Danny felt his eyes sting with tears. Ashrin had not just embraced change for himself. He was building an entire system to help others. They worked through the night, assembling a team. The young Draconids brought their research on color-based languages. A silicate engineer offered insights on visual pattern recognition. A human linguist specialized in non-traditional communication joined them. Danny coordinated while Ashrin used his position to arrange urgent meetings. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the young Draconids, a scholar named Sura, noticed that Kelvin color patterns had mathematical rhythms embedded in them. They were not just displaying colors, but creating complex sequences that conveyed layers of meaning. Previous translation attempts had only captured surface-level communication. With this understanding, they developed a real-time translation system that could interpret the full depth of Kelvin communication. When they presented it to the Kelvin delegation, the response was immediate and emotional. For the first time, the Kelvins felt truly understood. The trade negotiations reopened. Using the new translation system, they discovered the Kelvins had been expressing nuanced concerns about ecological impacts, not rejecting the agreement. With proper understanding, solutions came quickly. The Kelvins agreed to remain in the council, and their allied species followed. But the crisis had revealed something bigger. Ambassador Ford called a meeting with Danny, Ashrin, and representatives from 30 species. This cannot keep happening, Ford said. We cannot wait for crises to realize we are failing to communicate. We need a permanent solution. What emerged from that meeting became the Universal Communication Initiative. It would develop translation systems for all forms of communication, create educational programs teaching different communication methods, provide resources for families and individuals who communicated differently, establish standards for accessibility across all council facilities. The council voted to approve it with overwhelming support. They offered Danny the director position. Ashrin would serve as co-director, splitting his time between the station and Draka's Prime. Months blurred together as they built something unprecedented. They hired staff from 40 species, developed technology that could translate everything from color patterns to electromagnetic pulses, created training programs for diplomats and educators. Most importantly, they established support networks for individuals across the galaxy who had spent their lives being told they were broken. Danny received thousands of messages. Parents of deaf children thanking him. Nonverbal adults finally feeling recognized. Species who had felt excluded from galactic society now finding their place. Each message reminded him why this work mattered. One night, while past any reasonable hour, Danny found himself back in the botanical garden. So much had changed since he first saw Ashrin here, since he first decided to try communicating across the impossible gap between them. Footsteps, or rather claw steps, announced Ashrin's arrival. The prince settled beside Danny on the bench they now thought of as theirs. Are you tired? Ashrin sighed. Exhausted, Danny admitted. But good. This is good work. It is extraordinary work. You are changing the galaxy. We are changing it, Danny corrected. None of this happens without you. Without your courage to speak when everyone said you could not. Ashrin was quiet for a moment, looking at the flowers they had named together that first night. Do you remember when I signed that I wanted to speak, and you said you would teach them to listen? Of course. I thought you meant the council. The delegates. I did not understand you meant everyone. The entire galaxy. Danny smiled. I did not understand that either. I just knew you deserved to be heard. They sat in comfortable silence, watching other people move through the garden. A young Delphine practiced signs with their parent. A silicate diplomat taught color pattern basics to a human student. A Kelvin and a Tauran worked together on translation algorithms. Their previous tensions forgotten in shared purpose. 5 years later, Danny stood in the council chamber again, but not as a custodian or even as a director. He was there to watch Asherin receive the council's highest honor for service to galactic unity. The prince's speech, delivered through signs and translated into 47 languages simultaneously, brought delegates from across the galaxy to their feet. After the ceremony, they returned to the botanical garden one more time. The station had added a small plaque near their bench. It read simply, "Where understanding began. Do you ever miss cleaning?" Asherin signed with a hint of humor. Sometimes, Danny admitted. It was simpler, quieter. Would you go back? Danny thought about the young girl he had received a message from last week. She lived on Earth, deaf like he had been, and she had watched recordings of his work. Her message had said simply, "Because of you, I know I can do anything." "No," Danny signed. "I will not go back. This is exactly where I need to be." Asherin's signs were gentle, affectionate. "My friend, my brother in all but blood, you showed me that silence is not the absence of voice. It is simply a different language waiting to be understood." Danny looked around the garden, at all the people who had found their voices here, at the change that had rippled out from one custodian deciding to listen and one prince deciding to speak. "We did not just change how people communicate," Danny signed slowly, thinking through each word. "We change how people see each other, how they understand that different does not mean less." "And we are only beginning," Asherin responded. "There are still voices waiting to be heard, still people who need someone to listen." Danny nodded, feeling the weight of the crystal pendant Asherin had given him all those years ago. "Then we keep listening. We keep teaching others to listen, until everyone knows their voice matters." They sat together as the station's artificial night deepened. Two friends who had started a revolution with nothing more than patience, understanding, and the simple recognition that everyone deserves to be heard. Around them, the garden bloomed with flowers from 100 worlds, and the air filled with the quiet conversations of species learning to understand each other in languages beyond sound. The galaxy was changing, one sign at a time.